The warning lights flashed red across the dimly lit cargo bay of Research Station Delta 7. James Miller paused his routine inventory check, his tablet forgotten in his hand. The station's artificial gravity wobbled slightly, a clear sign that something had breached the outer hull during the recent meteor shower. "Control, this is Miller in Cargo Bay 3. Getting some strange readings down here," he reported into his comm unit. Static answered him. The communication system must have been affected too. James ran his hand through his short brown hair, a habit he'd developed during his 5 years as a xenobiologist on frontier stations. The rational part of his brain told him to leave the cargo bay and report to his supervisor. But 20 years of studying alien life forms had taught him that unusual situations often led to the most important discoveries. The sound came from behind a stack of supply crates. A wet, raspy breathing that didn't match any species in the station's database. James grabbed a portable scanner and a medical kit. If something was injured, his job was to help it, regardless of what it might be. As he rounded the corner, he froze. Time seemed to stop as his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. Curled up against the wall was a creature that every human in the galaxy had been warned about. Its black scales absorbed the emergency lighting, making it look like a piece of living darkness. 6 yellow eyes blinked at him independently, and wickedly curved claws scraped against the metal floor as it tried to move. A shadow hunter, the apex predator that had killed hundreds of early space explorers. The species that even the militant cracks feared, and it was injured. Station protocol was clear. Any shadow hunter sighting must be reported immediately, and the creature terminated with extreme prejudice. They were classified as non-sentient killing machines, operating on pure predatory instinct. But something made James pause. The creature's eyes tracked his movement with clear intelligence, not the mindless hunger he'd been taught to expect. One of its wings, a membrane of what looked like living shadow, was torn, leaking the dark fluid onto the floor. Despite its fearsome appearance, its posture was defensive, not aggressive. "You're hurt," James said softly, knowing it couldn't understand him, but hoping his tone would convey his intent. The creature's head tilted slightly, in an almost human gesture of curiosity. James slowly opened his medical kit, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. The shadow hunter watched him, its breathing still labored but steady. He pulled out a universal healing patch, a medical breakthrough that adapted to any known biology. "I'm going to help you," he said, taking a careful step forward. "Please don't eat me." The paperwork would be terrible. The creature made a sound, not the bone-chilling shriek described in training videos, but a low rumble that vibrated through James's chest. To his amazement, it shifted slightly, exposing its injured wing more clearly. James's hands shook as he applied the healing patch. The shadow hunter remained perfectly still, its eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him question everything he'd been taught about the species. The station's systems chose that moment to recover. "Attention all personnel," the overhead speakers crackled. "System reboot complete. Report any meteor damage to Central Control immediately." James looked at the creature, then at his comm unit. His next decision would either mark him as a madman or change the galaxy's understanding of an entire species. The shadow hunter was still watching him, and in those alien eyes, he saw something that sealed his choice. Recognition. "Control, this is Miller," he said into his comm. "All clear in Cargo Bay 3. No damage to report." He turned back to the creature. "Looks like you're my secret now. Let's just hope I'm right about you." The shadow hunter's wound was already beginning to heal under the patch. It made that rumbling sound again, softer this time, almost like a purr. James sat down on the floor, keeping a respectful distance but staying close enough to monitor the healing process. "You know," he said conversationally, "this either makes me the biggest fool in the galaxy or the first person to really see you for what you are. I guess we'll find out which." Over the next week, James developed a routine that would have gotten him fired, or possibly arrested, if anyone had discovered it. He started taking the night shift in cargo monitoring, using his security clearance to keep the area locked down while he studied his unusual new friend. The healing patch had worked better than expected. The Shadowhunter's wing had repaired itself within days, yet the creature hadn't tried to escape or attack. Instead, it watched James with growing curiosity, moving closer each time he visited. "You need a name," James said one night, sitting cross-legged on the floor while the creature investigated a protein bar he'd offered. "I can't keep calling you, hey you in my head. How about Shadow?" Not very creative, I know, but it fits. The Shadowhunter, Shadow, picked up the protein bar with surprising delicacy, using its claws like fingers. It studied the wrapper, turning it over and examining the text before carefully unwrapping it. James added another note to his growing research file. "Shows clear understanding of how packaging works. Suggests previous observation of tool use." Shadow took a small bite of the bar, and those 6 yellow eyes widened. A moment later, the rest of the bar disappeared. James couldn't help but laugh. Not exactly the diet of a mindless killing machine, is it? He pulled out his tablet and showed Shadow a star map. "I've been wondering where you came from. All our records show your species attacking ships and stations, but nobody knows where you live." Shadow moved closer, its dark scales rippling with patterns that James was starting to recognize as emotional responses. The creature reached out and touched the map with one claw, making a soft trilling sound. The lights suddenly flashed, and the station's computer announced, "Security sweep in progress. All personnel clear restricted areas." James jumped up. "Sorry, friend. Got to go. Security Chief Tom has been suspicious lately, and I don't want him finding you." As he turned to leave, Shadow did something unexpected. It reached out and gently caught James's sleeve with a claw. When he looked back, the creature pressed its other claw to its chest, then to James, a gesture that seemed unmistakably like gratitude. "You're welcome," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The next day, James nearly walked into Chief Tom in the corridor. The security officer's expression was grim. "Miller, we need to talk about your unusual hours in the cargo bay." James kept his face neutral. "Just being thorough with inventory, sir. Those meteor strikes caused some system glitches." "Really?" Tom's eyes narrowed. "Because our sensors have been picking up some strange readings. Energy signatures we can't identify. Probably just equipment damage from the strikes," James said, hoping his voice sounded steadier than it felt. "I can run a diagnostic if you'd like." "Don't bother. I'm sending a security team to do a full sweep tomorrow morning." James waited until Tom was gone before letting out a shaky breath. That night, he rushed to the cargo bay as soon as his shift started. "Shadow, we have a problem," he said, but stopped short. The creature was waiting for him and had arranged various cargo items in a pattern on the floor. Looking closer, James realized it was a crude map of the station. Shadow pointed to different sections, making soft clicking sounds. It was trying to communicate something about the station's layout. "You've been exploring at night," James realized. That's what the sensors picked up. But instead of feeling alarmed, he was fascinated. Shadow wasn't just intelligent. It was actively studying its environment. The creature nodded, an unmistakably human gesture it must have learned from watching James. Then it pointed to a section of the map and made an urgent sound. James looked closer. The maintenance tunnels. Of course, they're shielded from most scans. You can hide there during the security sweep. Shadow's scales rippled with what James now recognized as approval. As they worked together to plan the creature's temporary relocation, James marveled at how quickly their relationship had evolved. In just a week, he'd gone from fearing this supposedly mindless predator to working with it as a partner. "We're going to change everything they think they know about your species," he promised Shadow. "We just have to keep you safe a little longer." James sat in the dimly lit maintenance tunnel, reviewing the security footage on his tablet. Shadow had successfully evaded the search team, but they couldn't keep playing this hiding game forever. Sooner or later, someone would find out. Shadow emerged from the darker section of the tunnel, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for its size. The creature had brought something, a piece of metal that looked like it had been carefully shaped into a crude disc. "What's this?" James asked, taking the offered object. Shadow's scales rippled with excitement, a pattern he now recognized as anticipation. The creature pressed one claw gently against James's forehead, then to its own. James frowned, not understanding. Shadow repeated the gesture, more insistently this time. "You want me to think," James guessed. Shadow made an approving trill and touched the metal disc. James looked down at it, concentrating. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world exploded into his mind. Images flooded his consciousness. Vast crystal cities floating in purple skies. Creatures like Shadow flying in complex formations. Young ones learning in what could only be schools. But these weren't just pictures. Each image carried emotions, memories, entire concepts. James gasped and dropped the disc. The visions stopped instantly. Shadow caught the disc before it hit the ground, its eyes watching James with concern. That was your home," James said, his voice shaking. "Your people. You're not just intelligent, you're civilized. You communicate through shared thoughts and memories." Shadow nodded, placing the disc carefully in James's hands again. This time, James was prepared for the connection. New images formed. Shadow's people being attacked by early human explorers who mistook their telepathic greeting attempts for hostile actions. The Shadow Hunters, peaceful despite their appearance, retreated to the far edges of known space. Those few who still tried to make contact were hunted as monsters. "We got it all wrong," James whispered. "Your species never attacked anyone. You were trying to communicate, and we responded with fear and violence." Shadow's scales darkened, a sign of sadness, James now knew. The creature shared one more image. Other Shadow Hunters, watching human settlements from afar, still hoping that someday someone would understand. James stood up, determination filling him. "We need to show everyone the truth." "But how?" "The disc only works when you're helping focus the images, and most people would shoot first and ask questions, never if they saw you." Shadow made a series of clicks and trills, touching James's tablet. Through the disc, James understood. The creature wanted him to record everything. Document their interactions, the communication, the truth about their species. "It's risky," James said. "If we're caught before we have enough evidence, before people can understand." He didn't finish the thought. They both knew what would happen. Shadow shared another image, this one of James treating its injured wing that first day. The memory carried feelings of hope, trust, and certainty that this human was different. "Okay," James said, setting up his tablet's camera. "Let's make history, or rewrite it, I guess." Over the next few hours, James recorded everything. Shadow demonstrated its intelligence through problem-solving tests James devised. They documented the telepathic communication, with James describing the images and knowledge he received. The creature even showed how it had been learning human behaviors, mimicking gestures and understanding complex instructions. "This is incredible," James said, reviewing the footage. "With this evidence, the Galactic Federation will have to recognize your species as sentient beings. They'll have to." The station's emergency alarm cut him off. Red lights flashed even in the maintenance tunnel. "Warning," the computer announced. "Multiple unidentified vessels approaching. Hostile intent detected. All personnel to battle stations." James looked at Shadow, whose scales were shifting in a pattern he'd never seen before, one that somehow conveyed both worry and determination. Through the disc, Shadow shared one final image. The approaching ships, which James recognized with horror. Space pirates, the ruthless kind that attacked research stations for their valuable data and equipment. "They're coming," James said grimly. "And right now, you're the only one who knows they're not just here for our research." The station shook as the first pirate ship opened fire. James grabbed his tablet, securing their precious recorded evidence. Shadow's scales rippled with patterns that spoke of urgency and determination. Through the telepathic disc, the creature shared a quick series of images. The pirates' ships had a weak spot in their shield configuration, knowledge that Shadow's people had gained from years of silent observation. "We have to warn the defense team," James said, "but how can I explain how I know this without?" Another blast rocked the station. The lights flickered, and the computer's voice crackled. "Hull breach detected in sections 7 through 9. Security teams respond immediately." James's comm unit buzzed. "Miller, it was Chief Tom. Where are you? We need all hands at emergency stations." Shadow touched the disc to James's forehead, sharing another urgent image. The pirates weren't just after the station's research data. They were carrying banned weapons, capable of destroying the entire station. "We're out of time," James said. "Shadow, I know this is asking a lot, but would you help us, even though humans have hunted your people?" The creature's response came through the disc, a clear sense of determination and purpose. Shadow hadn't been hiding in the station by accident. It had been studying humans, hoping to find a way to bridge the gap between their species. "Control, this is Miller." James spoke into his comm. "I'm heading to the main defense control room, and I'm bringing help." "What help?" "Miller, what are you?" James cut off the comm. "Let's go, friend. Time to change some minds." They raced through the maintenance tunnels, Shadow moving with incredible speed despite its size. As they approached the control room, they heard weapons fire. The pirates had already breached the station. James keyed in his access code, and the door slid open. Inside, Chief Tom and 3 security officers were taking cover behind consoles as energy bolts flew through the air. 5 pirates, wearing heavy assault armor, were pushing forward. "Miller, get down," Tom shouted. Then he saw Shadow. What in the galaxy? Before anyone could react, Shadow leaped into action. Its dark scales absorbed the pirates' energy bolts like they were nothing. With incredible speed and precision, it disarmed 2 pirates without causing them serious harm, demonstrating exactly the kind of restraint a mindless predator shouldn't possess. James rushed to the defense console. "Chief, the pirates' shields have a weakness at these coordinates." He quickly input the data Shadow had shared. Tom stared at the console, then at Shadow, who had positioned itself between the security team and the remaining pirates, protecting the humans. "Miller, you'd better have one hell of an explanation for this." "Trust me," James said, fingers flying over the controls. "And watch." Shadow's scales shifted into a pattern James now recognized as focused concentration. The creature made a series of precise gestures toward the main screen, communicating shield configurations faster than James could input them. "Impossible," one of the security officers whispered. "It's helping us." The station's defensive systems locked onto the weak points in the pirates' shields. Return fire pierced their defenses, disabling their weapons. On the screen, they watched as the pirate ships began retreating. The remaining pirates in the control room surrendered, faced with Shadow's imposing presence and the station's armed security team. "The station is saved," the computer announced. "Hostile vessels retreating. Damage control teams to affected sectors." In the sudden quiet, everyone stared at Shadow. The creature calmly sat back on its haunches, scales shifting to a peaceful pattern, and offered the telepathic disc to Chief Tom. "Sir," James said, stepping forward with his tablet, "I have evidence you need to see, about Shadow's species, about everything we got wrong." He glanced at his friend. "They were never our enemies. We just didn't understand their attempts to communicate." Tom looked at the disc in his hand, then at Shadow, who had just helped save his station and his people. "Show me," he said. As James set up the recorded evidence, Shadow's scales rippled with what he now knew was hope. The truth would finally come out, born from crisis and cooperation, proving that understanding could overcome even the deepest fears and prejudices. The Galactic Federation Council chamber buzzed with tension. James stood before the semicircle of representatives, Shadow beside him. Armed guards lined the walls, their weapons trained on the shadow hunter despite its peaceful behavior during the past week. Xenobiologist James Miller, the council leader, spoke, her voice echoing through the chamber. You stand accused of harboring a Class 1 dangerous species, violating multiple security protocols, and potentially endangering an entire research station. How do you plead? James straightened his back. With all respect, Counsel, I plead that we've been wrong about the Shadowhunters. The evidence I've gathered. Evidence gathered through unsanctioned contact with a known predatory species, interrupted Representative Marcus, his face red with anger. This creature and its kind have killed hundreds. Shadow's scales rippled with sadness. Through their now constant telepathic link, James felt its grief for all the misunderstandings that had led to death on both sides. Council members, James said firmly, I ask you to look at the station's security footage again. Shadow helped save over 300 lives during the pirate attack. Does that match your profile of a mindless killer? Chief Tom stepped forward from the witness area. Over the past week, he had reviewed all of James's evidence and experienced the telepathic communication himself. I can confirm Miller's account, Tom announced. I've served in station security for 20 years. I've fought hostile aliens, pirates, and raiders. What I saw that day wasn't a predator attacking. It was a skilled warrior protecting civilians. Murmurs spread through the chamber. James activated his tablet, projecting images above the council floor, the recordings he'd made of Shadow solving complex problems, demonstrating communication skills, and sharing knowledge of its civilization. The Shadowhunters weren't attacking our early exploration ships, James explained. They were trying to establish telepathic contact. Our fear and violent response drove them into hiding. We've spent decades hunting a peaceful, advanced species because we couldn't see past our own prejudices. This is absurd, Marcus scoffed. Next you'll claim they have their own civilization. Shadow touched the telepathic disc to its forehead. Suddenly, the chamber's main display screen lit up with vivid images, the crystal cities, the schools, the complex society James had first seen in the maintenance tunnel. Several council members gasped. The council leader leaned forward, her expression shifting from skepticism to wonder. Is this real? She asked. More real than any evidence I could present, James replied. Shadow's people have been watching us, learning about us, hoping that someday we would be ready to understand them. And what of the deaths? Marcus demanded. The attacks on our ships. Shadow's scales shifted to a solemn pattern. Through James, it communicated to the council. Those deaths were tragic accidents, caused by fear on both sides. Its people had defended themselves when attacked, just as humans would have done. We have a choice, James said. We can cling to our fears and continue a pointless conflict, or we can admit our mistake and open diplomatic relations with a species that could teach us incredible things. The council chamber fell silent. James felt Shadow's quiet strength beside him, its presence calm despite being surrounded by those who had once hunted its kind. After what seemed like hours, the council leader spoke. Chief Security Officer Tom, during the pirate attack, did this, Shadow, have any opportunity to harm the station's crew? Multiple opportunities, Tom replied. Instead, it put itself between our people and danger. Without Shadow's help, we would have lost the station and all hands. The council leader nodded slowly. Representatives, we face an unprecedented situation. Our laws regarding dangerous species were written to protect our people, but when those laws are based on incorrect assumptions, we must have the courage to change them. She turned to Shadow. Would your people be willing to begin formal diplomatic contact, despite our previous mistakes? Shadow's scales rippled with colors James had never seen before, joy, hope, and something like forgiveness. Through their link, James received an image of Shadowhunters and humans working together, sharing knowledge, building a future that neither species could achieve alone. They'd been waiting for this moment for generations, James translated, his voice thick with emotion. All they want is a chance to show us who they really are. 1 month after the council hearing, Research Station Delta 7 had become something unprecedented. The first joint human Shadowhunter diplomatic outpost. James stood at the observation deck, watching as another Shadowhunter ship gracefully docked with the station. "Still feels like a dream sometimes," he said to Shadow, who stood beside him. The creature's scales shimmered with agreement and satisfaction. The station's corridors, once filled with fear at the mere mention of Shadowhunters, now buzzed with activity as humans and Shadowhunters worked side by side. Through the telepathic discs, now mass-produced by human engineers working with Shadowhunter craftsmen, communication flowed freely. Professor Miller, a young researcher, hurried up to them, excited. The joint science team has made a breakthrough. The Shadowhunters' knowledge of dark matter navigation. It's revolutionary. James smiled. Every day brought new discoveries as two civilizations shared their knowledge. The Shadowhunters' natural ability to absorb and redirect energy had led to improvements in shield technology. In return, human creativity and adaptability had helped the Shadowhunters develop new approaches to old problems. Through their link, Shadow shared an image of the latest arrival, a group of young Shadowhunters coming to learn about human culture just as human students were now studying in the Crystal Cities. Hard to believe that just a month ago, they were considered monsters, James mused. The station's main communication screen activated, showing news from across the galaxy. Footage played of other stations and colonies establishing contact with approaching Shadowhunter groups. Some humans still reacted with fear, but more and more were reaching out in friendship. Chief Tom approached them, nodding respectfully to Shadow. The security officer had become one of the strongest advocates for cooperation between the species. Latest reports from the frontier colonies, Tom said. Shadowhunter patrols helped drive off 3 pirate raids this week. No casualties on either side. They just scared the pirates so badly that they surrendered. James grinned. The sight of humans and Shadowhunters working together had quickly become the galaxy's most effective deterrent against criminal activity. It turned out that friendship with the most lethal predators was far more powerful than trying to fight them. Shadow's scales rippled with amusement, sharing memories of the pirates' faces when they realized they were facing a coordinated human Shadowhunter defense force. A group of human children ran past, followed by 2 young Shadowhunters in what was clearly a game of tag. The children showed no fear, and the young Shadowhunters had quickly learned how to play gently with their more fragile friends. That's the real change, James said softly. Not the technology or the defense agreements. It's seeing the next generation grow up without fear. Through their link, Shadow shared a deeper truth. Its people had always watched human children with particular interest. The way young humans could look past appearances and accept new things had given the Shadowhunters hope that eventually understanding would be possible. The station computer announced, "Attention! Cultural Exchange Program orientation beginning in Hall 3. All new human and Shadowhunter participants please attend." James and Shadow headed toward the hall, where they would help introduce another group of humans and Shadowhunters to each other's cultures. Along the way, they passed walls covered with artwork, human and Shadowhunter children's drawings of their new friends, showing dark, many-eyed shades playing happily with human figures. "You know," James said, "when I first found you in that cargo bay, I thought I was breaking all the rules. Turns out the only rule that really matters is to trust your heart when it tells you to reach out to someone." Shadow's scales rippled with a pattern that James now recognized as deep affection. Through their link, it shared an image of that first meeting, but from its perspective, seeing not the fear it had expected, but kindness in a human's eyes for the first time. The image shifted to the present, showing countless similar moments happening across the galaxy. After generations of hiding and being hunted, the Shadowhunters were finally being seen for what they truly were, not monsters, but friends waiting to be discovered. James touched the telepathic disc at his neck, sharing his own feeling of pride and hope. Together, They had not just changed minds, they had opened hearts across the galaxy. 1 year had passed since that fateful day in the cargo bay. James stood on the platform of the newly constructed Harmony Center, the first purpose-built facility for human Shadowhunter cooperation. Behind him, the massive structure rose into the clouds, its architecture a beautiful blend of human practicality and Shadowhunter crystal aesthetics. Shadow stood beside him, its scales gleaming with pride. They were about to address the first graduating class of the Joint Species Academy, 50 human and 30 Shadowhunter students who had spent the past year learning together. "Ready, friend?" James asked, touching the telepathic disc that had become as natural as wearing clothes. Shadow's response flowed through their link, a mixture of joy and nostalgia for how far they'd come. The audience before them represented the change they'd helped create. Humans and Shadowhunters sat together, communication discs glowing as they shared thoughts and feelings freely. In the front row, the Galactic Federation Council leader sat beside the newly appointed Shadowhunter ambassador, a sight that would have seemed impossible a year ago. James stepped up to the podium, Shadow at his side. "When I look at this graduating class," he began, "I don't see humans and Shadowhunters. I see explorers, scientists, diplomats, and most importantly, friends who will shape our future together." Through their link, Shadow added its own thoughts, which James spoke aloud. "A year ago, our peoples were separated by fear and misunderstanding. Today, we're achieving things neither species could have done alone." He gestured to the screens behind them, showing images from across the galaxy. Shadowhunter energy absorption technology had revolutionized space travel, while human innovation had helped expand the crystal cities. Joint defense fleets protected colonies from threats, and mixed research teams made breakthrough after breakthrough. But the greatest achievement, James continued, isn't in our technology or our defenses. It's in moments like watching a human child teach a young Shadowhunter to play catch, or seeing a Shadowhunter elder share ancient stories with human students. Shadow's scales rippled with emotion as it projected images of these moments to everyone wearing a communication disc. The audience murmured in appreciation, feeling the depth of meaning behind each memory. "To our graduates," James said, "you carry a special responsibility. You're the first class to experience true cooperation between our species. You've learned each other's ways not from textbooks or reports, but through direct experience and friendship." A young human student stood up, her disc glowing as she shared an image of her first day at the academy, how terrified she'd been of her Shadowhunter classmates. Next to her, her Shadowhunter study partner rose, sharing how that fear had turned to friendship through understanding and patience. "This," James gestured to the two students, "is our real victory. Not overcoming fear, but building trust. Not just accepting differences, but celebrating them." Shadow moved forward, its scales shifting in the pattern that the students had come to recognize as their teacher's proud smile. Through James, it reminded them that every great change begins with a single moment of courage. The courage to look past appearances and reach out in friendship. The ceremony concluded with something unprecedented, a joint performance by human and Shadowhunter students. The humans played traditional instruments while the Shadowhunters created beautiful patterns with their scales, their movements synchronized in a display of harmony that brought tears to many eyes. After the ceremony, James and Shadow walked through the Harmony Center's gardens, where crystal formations grew alongside earth flowers in a symbolic blend of both worlds. "You know," James said to his friend, "when I first found you in that cargo bay, I thought I was just helping an injured creature. I never imagined we'd change the galaxy." Shadow's scales shimmered with amusement. Through their link, it shared its own memory of that day, how it had deliberately chosen that cargo bay, having observed James's kindness to other creatures. It had hoped to find one human who would understand, and in doing so, start a chain reaction of understanding. As they watched the sunset paint the crystal spires in brilliant colors, James felt Shadow's contentment mirror his own. They had done more than prove humans and Shadowhunters could coexist. They had shown the galaxy that the strongest force wasn't fear or power, but the simple courage to reach out and make a friend. Above them, a mixed fleet of human and Shadowhunter ships patrolled peacefully, their unified presence a testament to how far they'd come, and a promise of how far they could still go together.